sure we have to rate every time we bring in a distinguished speaker. Hopefully next year we'll have better luck. But again, thanks a lot for coming in. And let me introduce Dr. Viswanath, right? I did it perfectly. He's a professor of health communication in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences at the Harvard School of Public Health, and the Patterson Center for Population Sciences at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where he chaired the steering committee for the health communication concentration. Dr. Viswanath was past acting associate director of the behavioral research program in the Division of Cancer Control and Population Sciences at SCI. In other words, he was the boss of Dr. Brett Hasty, who was here last week, giving us a workshop on NIH funding. So, and you hired him, right? So, and Dr. Viswanath was a recipient of a number of prestigious awards in communication and in public health, including the NCICA Outstanding Health Communication Scholar Award, the Joseph Cullen Memorial Award from the American Society for Preventive Oncology for distinguished achievement in continued national tobacco control efforts, and the Mayhew Dairy Award from the American Public Health Association for contribution to health education research and theory. He is also elected fellow of our ICA, International Communication Association, Society for Behavioral Medicine, I believe, and MAPOR, which is the Midwest Association for Public Opinion Research. So elected fellow in major associations. Now, here's a piece of very good news. Dr. Viswanath was recently named the leading Professor of Health Communication and co-director of the new Li Kyung Shang Center for Health and Happiness at Harvard School of Public Health. So it's really an incredible honor. So without further ado, let me give you a document.
You can hear me, right?
Yes.
I'm not exactly shy of retiring, so okay, so let me first thank Charlie for inviting me and all of you who are here. I assume because it's such a dreary day out there, you would rather spend it inside than hang around outside.
This is a very good crop. We don't get that many far from.
Well, thank you. Thanks for making the time, and it's such a delight. And thank you for having me here. It's good to see some old friends and then others here and share my pebbles of wisdom, so to speak, with you. So what I want to do in the next 30 or 40 minutes is really to engage you in a conversation on issues around inequalities and poverty, and how communications and communication can play a role in both exacerbating those inequalities as well as in mitigating them. And I have a particular focus on health, but the assumption is that this applies pretty widely to other realms in one's social life. So what the agenda for the day, for the task would be to really introduce you to this idea of communication inequalities, provide you with some illustrative data to buttress my arguments, and then show you data from one of our interventions which tries to address them. And then if I have time, I will share some observations from a study that we are engaged in currently in the field. I don't know whether we'll have time or not, but I'll try to share them. The difficulties we are having with the current M-Health study, so to speak. The buzzword is M-Health, I guess, these days. And if I have to, I'll share. We don't have the results, but we have some insights from fielding that study, and then open it up for questions. You know, this is a very exciting time. I think, especially for people of you know, your generation. I think, you know, these are the things, kind of things you take for granted. You know, where, you know, we are you know, developing all kinds of devices that are being not only developed but being fielded, which really combine a number of attributes or features that used to be dealt with very separately at one time, right? You know, so and most of us have these multiple devices. You know, so we now are able to access information as well as communicate with people. You know, every aspect, every facet of life is being influenced by these new information and communication technologies. That is not news to any of you. Maybe, and I'm sure 99.9% of the people here in this room have a better facility with these technologies than I do. I can barely manage my telephone, right? But the fact is that these are, there is really, you know, a very deep and broad penetration of these technologies in general. But I want to problematize it, you know, so I think so I just want to say this, you know, people think whenever I give these talks that I'm a Luddite, that I hate technology. I just want to assure you I like technology as much as you do. I can even learn, I'm beginning to learn to spell technology, but there are some issues. I want to problematize it, particularly from a specific point of view. You will hear it, right? So it's a great marriage. It's a great marriage of what we call as an information and communication technology system, tremendous implications for health communication research, practice, and policy. You know, and those of us who are in communications, particularly in health communications, are interested in how people access information, how people are exposed to information, whether they seek information actively, because seeking is a very critical component, expectation in health communication, given that we feel that people, you know, once they are diagnosed with a problem, or there's a family member or friend is diagnosed with a problem, they should go out and get this information. You know, and also I think these technologies are now allowing us in terms of, you know, promoting those solidary ties that were actually, you know, limited to ubiquity, but not necessarily so. So we have whatever we call them, you know, right from anywhere from dozen to 20,000 friends on Facebook. You know, so this kind of a, you know, I think, you know, developing those ties are critical. And certainly for those of us who are interested in health, social capital and social support are critical. So you can see, I mean, I don't need to go through every one of them, but certainly these technologies, at least in theory, should allow us to do that. And this broad and wide penetration, when I say broad and wide penetration, I'm not talking about the United States. You know, I think, you know, this is a global phenomenon, and I think, you know, provides us with some interesting opportunities to really develop some interventions, particularly if we have the capacity and the ability to marry you know, what we collect in the field with electronic health records and electronic medical records. I think, you know, that kind of you know, synchronization can really help us pinpoint problems and develop appropriate solutions. And I think, you know, what I like about this development is this notion of public-private partnership. I think much more so than in communication. You know, if I move from communication to public health, you know, I think, you know, there is a certain amount of suspicion of the private sector. You know, but you know, I'm not one of those who is cynical about the private sector. I'm always agnostic about everything, but not cynical. And the questions in the private sector, I think, is very critical. They play a very significant role. And I think, you know, this actually these developments in technology allow us to think through that partnership in addressing some of these problems, right? However, there is always a however here, right? However, the context in which these technologies are being introduced matter a lot, right? And particularly, I focus on issues of class, race, and place. these social contextual factors, as we call them, play a very significant role in how these technologies are adopted, maintained, sustained, and used, or not used. Right? So, so we have been for the last dozen years, focusing on a program of research that actually documents what we call as communication inequalities, and how those inequalities in communication are connected to or linked to inequalities in health. And having documented them, we are trying to develop some interventions, exemplar interventions, to see if we can mitigate those health inequalities and communication inequalities. So what I want to do for the rest of the talk is introduce these ideas again to illustrate my argument, right? So, poverty, and so most of my research the last 3-4 years has moved increasingly away from documenting inequalities, because we do know that they exist, to really zeroing in on issues of poverty and those who are poor, because I think the conditions under which poverty exists, and people who live in poverty face decidedly a different set of challenges, which warrant a much deeper, broader, sustained scrutiny on our part to really mitigate the conditions. And so, if you're living in these conditions, and I often hear people, oh, can they, take care of themselves? Don't they have willpower? Can they have more discipline? And so on and so forth. A kind of a discourse that is really pernicious in many ways, because one does not really understand these conditions. It's very difficult to really think about health when you're fighting for, or when you're making decisions on day-to-day aspects of life every day. So this is a really a luxury picture in many ways, because water is not that easily available. At least here, it shows that you can open the tap and you get the water, but not so in most cases. I think, in many parts of the world where I live, at least, right? So let me start by showing you what I mean by health inequalities. Almost all of you are aware of this, but and that's why I'll go through this very quickly. So in 1964, 50 years ago, 2014 actually, 2014 we celebrated the 50th year of the Surgeon General's report, a source of considerable celebration for us, because that report that came out, it's a thin document actually. And now if you look at the Surgeon General report, then these are huge tomes. But this was a thin document in 1964. About 50% of the adults were still smoking at the time, right? In 1964, by the time the report came out. Now, fast forward to 2015 or 14, the number is about roughly 21 to 22%, depending upon whose numbers you believe, right? It's about, it's anywhere from 18 to 21%, right? So that is significant progress. It is one of the greatest public health success stories of our time, and we should be rightly proud of it. We have done an interesting, an amazing set of interventions over a period of time, which have led for the smoking rates to tumble to where they are today compared to 50 years ago. I think it's something worth celebrating. The other part of my life also deals with vaccines, and immunization is another success story that one can celebrate. So this is good news, but so it's always a but here. To look at who continues to smoke, right? So here is an illustrative slide. If you look at who continues to smoke and using education as a stratifier, you can use income, you can use other kinds of stratifiers. I'm using education. What you see is, those with less than high school education continue to smoke at a higher rate compared to those with college education, right? Now, in fact, as I often point out, in because the differences between those two groups has actually widened over a period of time. The larger point I want to make here is, and you will see, I can show these data, and I'm sure some of you are already familiar with these data. I can show them on diabetes, I can show them on blood pressure, I can show them on obesity, right? I mean, these are well documented. But the larger point I want to make here is the benefits from our public health policies and interventions accrue unequally across different social groups. That's the lesson, right? We have good intentions, we intervene very well, we have great policies, but the people who benefit from these policies are not the people we always want to focus on, right? And this is a lesson you'll see continuous, right? So if you look at who is continuing to smoke, it's disproportionately people from lower socioeconomic position. In fact, it is increasingly patterned by subgroups, right? And I think I have the data. So it's just not a US phenomenon. If you look at what is happening in India, where I spent some part of my research, I have a portfolio of work going on in India. These are from the Demographic and Health Service. It's a survey of 200,000 people. And what you see again is those engaged in extractive economy like agricultural labor or in manual labor are much more likely to use tobacco compared to those in non-manual labor. And in fact, India is a really complex problem when it comes to tobacco because there is a poly-use problem, right? And there is a poly-use of tobacco. So you have combustible tobacco as well as chewing tobacco. And chewing tobacco is predominantly among the lower socioeconomic position. You can do the same thing with wealth. In India, again, those who are in the lowest quintile are much more likely to use tobacco compared to those in the highest quintile. And there is some kind of intersectionality here too, with women in rural, the poorest women using much more so than women in the richest quintile. Right? So the point I'm trying to say is these things can be documented again and again, but people have been trying to come up with explanations for this, right? And so what are the factors that contribute to these inequalities? And we have come up with a variety of them, the so-called social determinants of health. In fact, WHO finally even has a commission on social determinants of health. I hate that term, it's just so uncommunicative in many ways. It's so deterministic, so it's kind of, but anyway, we are stuck with it. I prefer a different term myself, but anyway, the conditions, living conditions, stratification of some kind, gender, sexuality, immigration status. You can see people have looked at a variety of these risk factors to explain these so-called disparities, or as I would like to call them, inequalities, right? So, but to me, the challenge has always been, so we document this, but to what extent are these factors addressable, right? That was what I have been focusing on. So, great, so living conditions are a problem, so should we improve the housing stock? It's a great idea, but look at where our budgets are, right? Look at the federal budgets on housing. It's not an easy thing to do. We can improve education, obviously, right? But look at what our schools, how our schools are being funded all over the country. People are suing the state governments, to get more funding for, right? So you can't, improve occupation. In fact, the structural unemployment factors are very significant and serious. People are being laid off at 35, 45, 55, and they are unable to find the jobs they need because of how the employment market has changed. So these are very difficult social conditions to track and change, and seemingly intractable. So what we have been doing is, okay, so we do have to address them, but is there another way to look at it? So I don't want you to mistake that somehow I'm ignoring the social conditions here, right? I'm very much cognizant of that. But from a purely communication perspective, so we have been focusing on to what extent either communication can mitigate or at least and address some of these health inequalities you find there, right? So this is very well documented. These social determinants with health outcomes or unequal health outcomes. So what connects? And so there are some biological mechanisms that people have been focusing on, very interesting mechanisms. For example, stress stemming from racism, does it lead to telomere shortening, right? And if telomeres are shortened, then it leads to all kinds of health problems, including cancer and so on and so forth. And that's all very interesting work, but I can barely spell telomeres in biology, so I said, okay, for me, let me stick to communications. Is there something we can do about it? So we have developed this model, and basically what we have looked at is, let us look at health communication. And if you find that social determinants of health, the social class or place or race, lead to inequalities in health communication, and do those inequalities in turn contribute to unequal health outcomes? That is, so what we are doing is we are actually adding a set of communication-centric variables to partly explain and also address these unequal health outcomes. Now, you may be looking for a path analysis or path analytical model. I'm not interested in this. This basically is a heuristic model, allowing me to guide the data I'm looking at on inequalities, and to address and to see if I can develop exemplar interventions based on that. Right? So it helps me put my arms around this very large body of work in two different fields, public health or social epidemiology and in health and communications. Right? So what I want to do is to spend the next 10 minutes or 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes or so, looking at how role issues of class and race manifest in communications. Really showing you this relationship between social determinants and health communication from illustrative data. And these data come from both national data as well as the data we have collected in our studies. I will show you just a few examples from the national data. Right? So we start with a very heuristic definition of what we mean by communication inequalities. We start by saying communication inequalities are differences among groups or social classes in the manipulation and distribution of information, and differences in access to an ability or capacity to take advantage of that information at the individual level. So our argument is that inequalities in communication manifest at two levels. One is at the group or institutional or macro level, other is at the individual level. So let me show you what I mean by that at the macro level. So here is one example of that. So if you take three brands or three product categories which contribute enormously to unhealthy public, right? Or public risk factors for bad public health, right? So we know it's very well documented. In fact, my colleagues, Steve Gottmaker and Bill Deans from CDC have documented it very. One of the first people to document this. Sugar-sweetened beverages are one of the significant contributors to national obesity problems. Tobacco, I don't have to tell you. And of course, fast food, right? I don't have anything against the single brands. Okay, so maybe they will sue me, but actually, the tobacco industry hates me anyway. But the point is, I just want to illustrate the communications inequalities between these three products or brands and what we do in public health, right? So, Coke's budget, communications advertising budget in 2014 was $3.5 billion, right? McDonald's about $1 billion. the tobacco industry spent about 9.6 or almost $10 billion in 2012 on marketing, right? They can't advertise. They can't advertise, so they only market. Right? Now, I don't know about you, but where I come from, as the senator said, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, pretty soon we are talking about real money, right? So, and if you think about the budget here, I shortly talked about my, when I was the associate director of the behavioral research program, part of the 5-a-day budget came out of my program. Guess how much money I had to promote 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, right? That campaign. I had a budget of $5 million, right? So we are talking about, so talk about inequalities in communications, right? At a group or management level. In fact, what is interesting is if you look at the beverage food industry spends approximately $2 billion per year marketing to children. People talk about childhood obesity. We need someone like Michelle Obama, who can overcome these kinds of challenges, right? Until she came on board and said, "This is one thing I'm going to tackle." There is no way you can get the kind of attention to this issue compared to the kind of budgets they have, right? What happened? In fact, I often use this example. Judge Gladys Kessler, who wrote the decision on the master settlement agreement when the tobacco industry was sued about 15 years ago, she herself observed that the tobacco, she didn't use the term communication inequalities, thank God I was able to use it, but she herself has observed that the tobacco industry has so much money that they can distort and mislead the people by sowing the seeds of doubt among the public on the relationship between tobacco use and lung cancer, right? And she herself, it's a US judge who actually wrote it in her decision, observing these inequalities, right? There's no way, if you look at tobacco counter-marketing campaigns are some of the better funded campaigns in our country. FDA is now embarked on a campaign. I think their last budget was something like $400 or $500 million. CDC has a considerable budget, and then American Legacy Foundation, which is now called Truth Initiative, has I think $20 or $30 million. Nothing compared to just Marlboro itself, spending hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, I don't know how much they spend globally. We were trying to get that number for a WHO report we were working on. Those data are not published at all, right? So that's a global level. And then you also have, that's at the macro level. You also have inequalities at the global level. So every time I raise these issues, someone will come and tell me, but, cell phones will solve all the problems, and everybody in the world has cell phones. That's what they tell me. Everybody in the world has cell phones, so you don't have to worry about it. So that doesn't somehow assure me. Or people will tell me, but internet is now penetrating all over the world, and now once we intervene on internet, we can solve a lot of health problems, right? Which again sounds great. I only wish it was true. If you look at the data of penetration, these are from International Telecommunications Union, and the penetration of broadband between developed and developing world. Obviously, you see those differences between these two parts of the world. This is a very gross category, not very helpful, but I'll show, but if you actually look at some Pew data, clearly shows, this is something that is related to gross national product, or GNP or GDP. So there's a tremendous variation in different parts of the world. With 87% going online in the US, compared to 20% in India, 8% in Pakistan, 15% in Uganda, and so on and so forth. I mean, obviously 20% in India is about 250 million people. It's not a trivial number, but the fact of the matter is it is not cheap to access these services. But the larger point I want to say again is, there is a room for optimism because of broad penetration, but certainly there is this variation and fact that we should not overlook as we develop our interventions. This is a different way of showing how it is related, internet access is related to per capita income. But if you look at where the problems are in terms of health, this is where there are major both non-communicable disease problems as well as developing world problems such as infectious diseases compared to the problems here. Okay, so what I want to do is also provide you with some illustrative data on individual level inequalities. Again, very descriptive, and then go through one intervention. Okay. We have studied these inequalities through, as I said, national level data, national surveys. Shirley mentioned HINTS. HINTS was one of the first platforms where we began documenting this, but we also documented it on a variety of other studies. Both, by the way, I just want to say, we have done this not just in the US, but also in other countries, and we have actually shown these in the same patterns, and amazingly similar patterns, maybe even a bit more starker in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia. Asia is a bad India and Hong Kong. So this is one example in the US, a very good example of intersectionality. Even though these data are a little older, the patterns have not changed. These are from National Telecommunication Infrastructure Administration, which also has come out with some recent data. In essence, what it is showing is it's a combination of race, education, and geography, clearly showing if you are white, college educated, living in urban areas, you are much more likely to have broadband penetration compared to if you are poor, minority, women. Gender is not here, but urbanism and education and race matter as together. In fact, the idea of intersectionality, the feminist studies scholars have actually brought that notion to our attention originally from their work. When a woman makes 60 cents or 70 cents to every dollar, but we're accounting for every criterion, and that's a great example of how intersectionality works. Black women is a great example of where have lower prevalence of breast cancer and die at a higher rate. And so I think they brought our attention to this notion of really multiple social status categories and how they matter. By the way, these patterns have not changed. The other thing I want to say, which I don't have the data here, I don't think I have the data here, is the cross-sectional data that we routinely collect, right? These are one point at a time, are very unreliable. What we have shown is, so if you look at Pew data, the coverage is almost celebrated, right? 70% have access to internet, 80% have access to internet. Everybody is using social media. But if you follow them over time, as we do in our studies, what you see is this 80% is actually is a stretch, because most of the people we work, when you are poor, you go on and off the grid. You have access to online services for a few months, you can't pay the bill, you stop paying the bill, you lose the connection for a few months, then you repay the bill, and then you get the connection back. This is the palpable reality every day for those who are poor. Because if you are poor, you have to make these decisions every month. In my defined set of amount I have available, where do I make the allocation, right? And television, cable, broadband, other services are always expendable depending upon, and they make these choices. And they're very savvy about it. You know, we have done also some in-depth interviews on how they make these decisions around communication services. They're pretty savvy. They know what they're doing. They know what their priorities are, right? You know, one of them told me, well, Vish, you know, what will they do? Cut me off? No, you know, they will give me extension for 2 weeks, then for a month, then for 2 months, because they want me as a customer. After 2 months, they cut me off, then I go and pay the bill, you know, then I get a connection back, right? Because that's the kind of navigation you have to do, you know, day in and day out to make ends meet, you know. And these are also from few. By this time, you get the picture, right? And I don't have to repeat it, you know. Even at the individual level, there are serious issues, whether it's broadband at home or using internet, or even cell phones. Cell phones are a great example. Again, everyone has cell phones, but again, people go in and out of connections with them, right? So, who uses the internet globally? Again, owners of the computers, English speakers, higher education, income. You can see, these differences. Okay, and so we have documented all of these in a variety of factors, including internet, but also daily newspaper readership. Time spent with different media, trust in media, etc., etc. So all these things that we are interested in communications, right? So we are also, interested in how people process this information, right? So one of the things we have been looking at is the idea of stress. Now, if you are poor and you are facing micro-humiliations, right? What we call our microaggressions, daily, every day, racism, sexism, or whatever ism we want to talk about, right? Every day there is an insult. And you're making these decisions, it is very difficult to be not stressed out, right? Now, we are also under stress. A number of you are under stress because it's the final week or the exam week, right? So you have a term paper due or whatever, we have a next grant due. But our stress is very different from the stress experienced by those who are poor. And the question is, what happens? So when we ask these people who are poor to make certain decisions, right? We are always talking about informed decision making around health issues. What happens? What are the challenges? It's very difficult to study this, but one group that has been doing some very interesting work, there are two groups actually who are doing work in this area. We have just begun to do that in our own group on this notion of information processing. But more than that, how do people react to this? I think one group is Senthil's group. Let me see. Senthil Mullainathan, who's an economist at Harvard, along with another Princeton economist who has been looking at it. And what he's doing is, and I think if you look at his science paper, what he's saying is what happens. And his argument is that when people see what the challenge they have is, cognitively speaking, they have resource scarcity. And one such resource is time, right? So when you have these kinds of resource scarcity, what does it do? What does it do to your mind when you are going through this notion of scarcity? And how do you allocate, right? And what he has done a series of experiments and says, people are struggling. As I said, when I talked about these microaggressions every day, whether it's because of race or ethnicity or gender, people are trying to understand, okay, so now I have to deal with sexism, I have to deal with racism, I have to deal with paying tuition on some things, I have to deal with groceries. It's a challenge for them to really focus on one thing. So there is this, what he has done is documented this differential level of allocation of attention to these topics, right? So we know that, so if you can do your health campaigns, you can tell them how to eat healthy, how to engage in physical activity, which all sounds good, which also makes us feel nice that we are doing something good. But the fact of the matter is, there is the challenges, because there is so much demand on your attention. And the other thing is, so there are these demands, so they're constantly juggling. I talked about paying bills, how they juggle paying bills, and so their attention also is equally, manifests equally that way, where they are juggling constantly. And of course, I don't think they document this, but others have done this. This idea of cognitive overload. How many more things can I deal with, right? So I had one very poignant experience after the recent racism incidents, the police brutality incident. So we had a town hall meeting in the school. A couple of students, a couple of faculty, we spoke. As a part of it, we just wanted to engage in a conversation around these issues of racism. And one woman in the audience, started, what we wanted to do, we made some opening remarks, and then we wanted everybody to engage as a part of this conversation, as a town hall meeting. One woman started talking, and then started crying, saying, "I'm just tired. I'm just tired. I don't know how many things I can handle. I just can't handle it anymore." Now, that's an anecdote, but actually there is evidence for that. What she's saying is, she's a physician. She's a African-American physician who's taking a year off to come and do her public health, MPH at Harvard. And if a physician with resources can feel that, just think about people with no social resources, how they handle these things, right? It's not sure. So, Kathy Eden, who's now your neighbor at Johns Hopkins, who was at Kennedy School, has been doing some very interesting work with interviewing women and men who are in poverty. By the way, when I say also poverty, please remember these are working poor. Most of them have actually jobs, and maybe some of them have actually 2 jobs or 3 jobs. And Kathy documents really this notion of struggle and decision making they go through every day. So we can tell people all we want about education and how to take care of their health, but if there are other conditions that challenge them, social contextual conditions, I don't know how much our health campaigns will have the kind of impact we want. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that you really need to look at the social context in which you are doing your campaigns and how people are receiving this information and acting on it, rather than just looking at them as individuals. Okay, so we are out of time. So what I want to do is maybe go through 2 quick slides and then leave time for questions. Okay, so I won't have time to do all the interventions. So what we have been doing, so I have documented these inequalities in communication across a variety of studies, across a variety of health conditions. I'll be happy to share our papers. But then if I leave you now here, it will be very depressing, right? So I don't think I will be invited back again. So I want to leave with a ray of hope. So we have been intervening. We have developed some exemplar interventions to address or mitigate those inequalities. So, one of them is called Click to Connect. It's a randomized controlled trial where we actually provided free internet access and free computers to urban poor compared to a control group. Project Clear is an FDA-funded study on graphic health warnings on cigarette packs. Again, all our focus is on urban poor. So we actually, the reason FDA came to us and gave us the money is because our lab specializes in really looking at studies that engage and involve and oversample urban poor. Planet Mass Connect is actually a community level intervention with CBOs, community-based organizations, to tackle inequalities at the community level, to really build capacity among community-based organizations, to adopt evidence-based interventions, or to transform public agenda around health inequalities. And we have a mHealth study in the field. We won't have time for all of them, but let me just talk about Click to Connect. So what we have done is, we said, okay, so what if we obviate this problem of not being able to pay the bills and provide them with continuous internet access? What happens? How do people use these surveys? And what do we learn about the browsing patterns of the urban poor? The reason we were interested in it is, if you and I are using the internet, generally, if we go to certain sites, without us knowing about it, we get to where we want to go, right? So Amazon has a 3-click rule. Within 3 clicks, generally you will get to where you want to go, because Amazon is documenting your browsing behavior every step of the way, which is bad news. But the good news is that they are able to create the architecture behind the scenes to help you and satisfy you. However, if we don't understand the browsing behaviors and the challenges among the urban poor, how will we design the kind of sites that will be useful to them, right? So that was the intention in this study. So what we did is we gave them free computers, free internet, some technical support, and a website. We created a website for them. I don't have time to go through the entire thing. We collected a lot of data. We have self-report data from pre and post surveys. We have a lot of data from staff on relocation. This is something that was really startling for us, the number of times they move. Matthew Desmond's book that came out recently is a stark reminder about how often they move because they are evicted. They move because of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, all kinds of reasons, They move a lot. We have IT call logs if they have a problem, but the real condition is tracking internet data. We said, we'll give you free internet, you can keep the computers out of the study, but you should let us track everything you are doing, right? So for 9 months, we tracked everything they did 24/7, right? So we have something like 7 million records of data from them, tracking data. So we know what people do when they go on the web, right? Even Google knows it, maybe NSA knows it too, but we also have other data on people, health conditions, right? So what was surprising to us was that even though we gave them free classes, free internet, computer at home, still a certain percentage of them could not use it. 70% said no free time, 54% said concerned about information quality, 43% said even after all that they have difficulty in using that information, they find it and getting frustrated with the search of the information. That is, the way we created our architecture does not help this group, right? And there are tremendous number of barriers. One of the things we learned is we were paying the internet bill. Someone would call us in the study, the sample, and say, "Oh, my internet was cut off." We said, "Why? We are paying the bill." "Oh, I don't know. This cable company, I won't name the cable company, cut my internet off." And then we would call the cable company. "What the heck are you doing? We are paying the bill." "Oh no, they have signed up for triple bundling, so they're getting TV and internet, and they're not paying the bill." So now, some of them don't even know they're signing up for all these things, and the bill will go up. It sounds very seductive. The first month it's very cheap, and then it starts going up in a couple of months. So we had to convince the cable company that before you cut them off, please call us, and we'll work with you. It's very, one part is collecting this data, but other part is unintended consequences, that we are learning a lot about. And a lot of them, despite all that, have problems. So the more problems they have, the less information seeking that there is. But I want to quickly go to one issue that I have been thinking about. So our question is, if we give this, how do they use it, right? What do people do with browsing? I know how I use it. I know how most of you use it because there are data on you out there, But how do urban poor use it? Because to me, there is a very selfish reason for that. I've been trying to advocate that internet use is like power use or like heating. It should be subsidized by the federal government for those who are poor. And if I have to make that argument, I have to show that people make very good use of internet. They also make bad use of internet, and you should see, some of the sites people go to, everybody, not just poor. But, so that was a question we were interested in. So we asked the question, who is best positioned to participate in the online world? Do they use it in a very diverse ways? And do they use it for capital enhancing information? What we mean by that is for higher education, money, government resources, housing, jobs, and how does this use of using it for capital enhancing information related to health information? Right? That was the argument we wanted to make from a health communication centric perspective. As we were doing this, I had this call from a New York Times reporter. He said, Dr. Viswanath, we heard that you have this NIH grant with urban poor, and I want to know what you are doing. So I explained to him what I was doing. Then he said, well, I have a hypothesis. I said, oh my God, so okay, so what is your hypothesis? And I said, my hypothesis is people who are poor don't know how to use the internet well. They waste their time, they use it for trivial purposes. I said, wait a moment, no. I have data that is incorrect. They are, once they become familiar with internet, they are just like you and I. They use it in normal way. No. Can you put me on to one of your sample participant subjects? So I had to go to my IRB, get a permission from my IRB, and introduce him to a couple of people so that he can interview them. So we were thrilled. And then he called me again. I was sitting in Boston winter, and I was at a meeting in sociology department. I came out, I was sitting in my car in a cold winter rainy day, and I talked to him for another half an hour, convincing him why he's wrong, right? Why his interpretation, his hypothesis is wrong. But this is a story he wrote. Essentially, wasting time is a new digital divide in digital era. As access to devices has spread, children in poorer families are spending considerably more time than children from more well-off families using their television and gadgets to watch shows and videos, play games, blah, blah, blah. Think about it, Somehow they are different from us. We are too wise. We know how to use it, our kids know how to use it, but they don't know, right? This is the kind of nonsense that undercuts our argument of subsidizing internet services. President Obama has taken a lot of risk in actually promoting this subsidy, but this, New York Times has a kind of platform that I don't have. Nobody will listen to me, even if I'm from Harvard, but certainly, New York Times is all over, right? So what we did, we actually looked at the data. The data are very clear. Just should not surprise you, right? Once you are familiar with it, you will use it for a variety of purposes, right? Just as we all do, right? You will entertain yourself, you will buy airline tickets, you will do your banking, you will read your newspaper, you will communicate with friends, right? It's just like anybody else. And in fact, we showed that greater the felicity with the use of internet, that is over a period of time, greater the use for health information seeking, which is also not surprising. And in fact, the more you are likely to use it for capital enhancing purposes like education or government or other kinds of capital enhancing information, the more likely you will also use it for health information. None of that should be rocket science, but once we documented it, it's very clear, how wrong is this guy? I actually sent him a note. He completely ignored me, blew me off. So I'm not surprised. You don't want to tell a reporter from New York Times that he's wrong, right? But the point is, we were able to reach out to other sources to provide them with this kind of information. But essentially, the point is, and even his argument, entertainment, in fact, even if you use it for entertainment, it is still positively related to health information seeking. It's not a zero-sum game, unlike the arguments he has been making. So let me stop here. I have a lot of other studies, but I won't have time to go through them. Let me just end by saying this is our MHealth study, which is also quite scary, actually. So just to say that if you are doing health communication, I think we should operate under the understanding of these inequalities that exist, and they should be particularly focused on the poorer countries as we do this thing. There is promise from these ICTs. I don't want to say that these don't work. They do work, but we really need to understand the context in which they are being introduced. There are tremendous opportunities, I think, and if you really focus on the social context and how the technologies are adopted and used, and if we develop our interventions and policies appropriately, I think we should be able to mitigate these health inequalities that we see every day. So let me stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this interesting and informative presentation. I come from Egypt and I conducted some research on health habits and family planning and literacy in rural Egypt. And I, interestingly enough, found that people had very creative and innovative ways of getting around some of the communication information barriers. For example, we had something which is called the wasila, which means the connection, whereby just one person in the whole village has access to high-speed internet, and everybody else is connected to this one household for as little as less than $1 a month. Or the same thing with live television. One person has a live TV and everybody else is connected. Of course, it's not legal, but it's very creative. It explains how people can get around some of the infrastructural barriers to seek information. So I wonder if you found anything parallel or similar to your own research. And number two, really the main issue has been the framing of the health messages and the way these messages did not resonate well with this population. It was like the senders are in one island and the receivers are in a completely different island. They're not both on the same page. So we had all issues with decoding of the message and sometimes even misinterpretation.
Right. So there are two, let me answer them quickly. Number one, we have begun to document a number of creative ways of working around these barriers. I often say that just because you are poor doesn't mean you are dumb, actually, right? You have to be very smart if you are poor to navigate and work around the system. And it is seen routinely, in all parts of the world, people have devised ways of really working around the system. So this is a great classic example of one person having it and other people using it. In India, there is something called missed calls. I don't know whether you know this or not. The idea of a missed call is that you call somebody, they don't pick up the phone, and so they know, okay, meet me at 5 o'clock here. Okay, so I'll give you a missed call. That's what they say, all right? So you get the call, you don't answer it, and you show up at 5 o'clock there. So the very creative ways of doing this, including in our studies, and I think, and that's the reason in all of our studies we oversample. We don't even sample high SES people anymore, because if we do that, we can't oversample minorities and poor. So almost exclusively our studies focus on that so that we can have a sufficient number of people in this sample to look at some of these patterns. So that's one. Second, I would say I focused in my discussion today on platforms, obviously on platforms. But of course the content and the formats also matter. But I'm less confident in asserting that this format works with this group and that format works with that group. We have been trying to document it very carefully. For example, in the FDA study, we are looking at negative emotions. About the 9 warning labels that FDA has recommended, which is under now court order, they won't show up on the cigarette packs. But only one of them has some kind of a positive emotion, right? I quit is one of them, I think, The rest of them are all eliciting negative emotions. And we were worried about it, and I think what we found in our studies is that they seem to actually work. I'm very, very nervous about engendering negative emotions, especially when you don't have resources to address those emotions. So we are actually doing a companion study where we are looking at the community capacity in helping people quit. So you can scare the heck out of people by putting these very ugly warning labels on cigarette packs. Now I'm scared. So what do I do? How do I quit? What are the resources I have? So we have actually done some in-depth interviews in the community to see what resources are available. So I don't know. All I'm saying is an empirical question. Somebody said narratives are the best way to communicate. We don't know. Maybe under some conditions, for some issues, narratives are good. For some issues, clear appeals are good. All I'm saying is it's an empirical question, but certainly I haven't focused on it, but other studies have focused on this message effect.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. And I have 2 things. One, on following up on that, we have been starting to hear about and look into precision medicine. I don't know if you want to speak to that, because that sounds like kind of what you're suggesting.
Right.
Yeah, and the second thing I want to say is a new kind of phone, in addition to whether it's Android, iPhone, and then you mentioned about these cyclical phone accounts. We just learned about what people in the community we work with call Medicaid phones, and so we're looking at developing a mobile app. But these phones that are provided them they limit what apps they take even, and so you have a very low income community that even with thinking about access, there's other ways that limit their access.
Right. Sure. What's the first question? I'm sorry.
Precision medicine.
Yeah. So, well, I'm trying not to be cynical. Francis Collins is a very savvy, smart, articulate guy, and certainly came up with this wonderful term, precision medicine, and certainly I think the excitement is warranted on some levels. I mean, I work with a group of geneticists, and actually I'm working with a colleague of mine to look at differences in tissue mutations between African Americans and whites, lung cancer, and communication issues around that. I do think there's a lot of promise there, but to be very frank, what does it mean in terms of communication? Number one, so here is a classic case. So you do these GWAS studies, and you find some pattern, something somewhere, some gene is related to some disease. Then what do you do with it, right? Number one. Number two, so once you discover something, then you develop this medicine, and so there are some for certain types of cancer, but each of them costs $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 per dose. Who is going to pay for it? But who is going to make? What kind of a drug manufacturer can make these medicines individually for each person, right? So I lose money for the first 100,000 doses, but I subsequently make money. So, but that's not going to be the case if you are doing precision medicine. So it's very interesting. It's a nice idea and concept, but I worry about the population groups I work with. To what extent will they benefit in the near term? My own argument would be, it's certainly worth moving in that direction, but don't ignore the people I work with just because it's so exciting on this side. And that's my worry in terms of shifting these allocations they're making. Now, on mHealth, you saw me skipping 20 slides. Because we are in the middle of a surveillance study using this very new app called Ethica, that we have done a feasibility study. We are now doing a large-scale study in 2 cities, Houston and Boston, actually 3 cities in Lawrence, Boston, and Houston. And the challenges are incredible. So we have these phones that people are using, not even Medicaid phones, people have smartphones. But none of these smartphones can really download apps that are intensive, number one. Number two, they have very limited data plans, right? So in this study we have done, we do EMA studies along with some, through accelerometry and geotagging of the data, we get the data back. But these are data, bandwidth intensive, and they run out of, allocation for data plans, So we are running into all kinds of problems. I have staff even as I speak. I have 8 people working on this issue in Houston and here, because it's a serious problem. So I look at all these mHealth studies in the literature. I mean, I hate this term mHealth, this buzzword. By this time you should know I hate a lot of terms, right? E-health, mHealth, papyrus health, whatever, yes, health, right? You look at this study, I wonder how they do these studies, because the problems we are encountering are problems that are not reported in the literature. And I wonder, because when we are recruiting people, they come to us, we're trying to download stuff for them, you can't download them, they don't have access to things. So I have become, I started off somewhat enthusiastic, now I'm becoming somewhat mildly unenthusiastic about this because of the tremendous challenges we are encountering in executing and fielding the study, which is a reflection of a world that we don't know very well. And I think at the FDA, I showed you a couple of slides of the FDA presentation. I think 6 months from now, I will have some neat data. Invite me back on this issue. So we are recruiting only urban poor as a part of the study, so we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Did you?
Yes, it seems that you argue that the more access among the low SEP population can help promote their seeking health information. However, is the online health information unbiased and accurate? All those companies you mentioned, they may have already invested a lot of campaign online also, and how could you address your participants encounter all those information? And also, your participants are aware of the monitoring of your research group. So how could you guarantee they're continuing seeking health information out of your project?
So if I understand the three questions, let me see if I understand them. So one is, do the participants know about monitoring? Of course they know about monitoring. I mean, we declare that we have a very as you have here, a very vigorous IRB process that I jumped through 3 hoops, and a variety of so we get informed consent agreement. But the fact of the matter is that's a problem with any experiment. But remember, this is for 9 months, right? So you may be very conscious that you're being monitored on day 1 and day 2, but if you're being tracked for 9 months, do you know that you are being tracked? Do you know that your telecommunication company knows exactly where you are sitting? Right? No, they know. But do you care? No. Over a period of time, you can't live as a paranoia, right? I mean, we are tracked. The same thing here. So they forget that they are being monitored, and especially when I look at the sites they have gone to, obviously they are not exactly worried about it. It raises another issue of informed consent. What the heck does informed consent mean? I'm increasingly questioning what does informed consent mean. They sign the informed consent, but the kind of data we are collecting is scary, and we have disabled many features of our app not to collect certain kinds of information. Even then we are collecting information, So I'm increasingly questioning what informed consent means for M-health studies and e-health studies. So that's one issue. Second, in terms of websites, no, it's frustrating. I think websites are not particularly accurate. So you have WebMD on one side, on the other hand, you have cookie websites advising, providing all kinds of bad things. And that's the reason for doing this kind of a study. Is there a way we can create websites that particularly cater to low literacy, low resource communities? And that's the goal of this study. If you don't know how they use it, we don't know how to create that part of the architecture.